Tara Reade's allegation of sexual assault against Joe Biden is still being downplayed by the media. I made a video last week where I talked about how New York Times and CNN and Washington Post, among others, refused to comment on this story and they didn't publish any articles about it. Now, however, they have finally started talking about it, but not really in the way that you'd expect. So first, let's look at the New York Times. Finally, after 3 weeks, they have this article talking about Tara Reade and how she alleges that Joe Biden sexually assaulted her back in 1993, talking about her story and what she claims happened back then. Obviously, we don't really know what happened because we weren't there. But the job of the media should be to publish what they know and to inform the public. But for almost 3 weeks, they refused to do that. There was nothing about this allegation, again, for almost 3 weeks. The New York Times put out this article also talking about why they waited so long to talk about the story. And most of it is basically what you'd expect, them saying we wanted to learn more and all of these things that are good, but didn't really apply during the Brett Kavanaugh accusation. And that's actually brought up here in this article. The New York Times executive editor was asked, why was Kavanaugh treated differently? And his answer is a really poor answer. I'm going to break it down into 3 parts. First, he says Kavanaugh was already in a public forum in a large way. I want to contest that. Yes, Brett Kavanaugh was in a public forum in a large way because he was a nominee for the Supreme Court. However, Joe Biden, who is the accuser in this case, was the vice president for 8 years and has been in the Senate for decades. He is significantly more publicly known than Kavanaugh ever was and perhaps ever will be, even with all of the nonsense that happened in 2018. So to somehow claim that that is a difference between them is complete nonsense. He continues and says, if you ask the average person in America, they didn't know about the Tara Reade case. And that is true because you didn't tell them about it. It is your job to tell them about what's happening in the news. You're a newspaper. That's your job. If you don't tell them about the Tara Reade case and the Tara Reade accusation, how are they supposed to know about it? The only reason any of us knew about the Blasey Ford accusation was because you told us constantly. This is not an indication of the American public being uninformed. It's an indication of you not doing your job. And then lastly, he says, Kavanaugh was in a very different situation. It was a live, ongoing story that had become the biggest political story in the country. And that ties back to his second claim. It's because you told us about it. If the Tara Reade accusation had gotten a half or even a quarter of the press that the Kavanaugh accusation did, everyone would know about it. It would be a huge story. But it's not because they chose not to run it. And it's really obvious why. They claim it's because they wanted to have more evidence and back it up. But the fact of the matter is, they like Joe Biden, they don't like Brett Kavanaugh, and that's the main difference here. Now, jumping to the Washington Post, they also did this article about Tara Reade's accusation against Joe Biden. They don't try to excuse it in the same way. They don't really address the fact that they waited 3 weeks to talk about it. But they do write this article in such a way to, in my view, downplay her accusation. Let me give you the most obvious example. So here, they quote Tara Reade as saying, I don't have an agenda other than I just want my story told. Which makes sense. But literally 3 paragraphs later, they have this. But since January, Reade has repeatedly plugged Sanders' campaign while criticizing Biden on social media. That is straight up implying that perhaps Tara Reade has some political motivation for this accusation, which is essentially trying to hurt her credibility. It's not trying to help her in any way or tell her story. It's just saying that she might be politically motivated. But that's not the only time they really tried to downplay this accusation. They also have here that Reade described this accusation apparently to her mother back when it happened, but her mother died in 2016, so they can't ask her about it. She also told a friend who corroborated Reade's story, but doesn't want to be named, so they have to remain anonymous. They also talk about how last year, Reade did an interview with the Washington Post and claimed that Biden touched her inappropriately, but did not allege sexual assault in the way she is now, which again, is trying to hurt her credibility. If you're looking at an allegation of sexual assault, it's fine, and some would argue necessary, to look at the credibility of the individual. If there is no one who can back up her story or no one who is willing to, that kind of hurts her credibility. But this article, to me, focuses more on hurting her credibility and helping Joe Biden than it really does in telling the story. Let me give you one more example. Here, it talks about how Joe Biden has been accused of inappropriate touching by several other women, though nothing as serious as Reade's. But then it says, more than a dozen women, by contrast, have accused Trump of forced kissing, groping, or sexual assault, and blah, blah, blah. So in an article talking about Tara Reade accusing Joe Biden, they somehow managed to slip in the fact that Trump has also been accused of sexual assault. That is not supposed to be in this article. This is not an article of Trump versus Biden. It's an article of Tara Reade accuses Joe Biden of sexual assault. why is Trump even here? Because they're trying to help Joe Biden. I try not to be a cynical guy, but when you have the media ignore this for 3 weeks, and then they come out with articles like this, where they're trying to hurt her credibility, to hurt Trump at the same time as propping up Joe Biden, I kind of get skeptical here. And in response to this Washington Post article, Rose McGowan, who is a very, very strong #BelieveWomenAndMeToo supporter, said that this is not journalism, this is an agenda, this is a hit piece, and saying that they've sunk to a new low. So I'm not the only one saying this. In contrast, compare that article to this one about Blasey Ford. And just the title itself shows how different they are. So even though the media is no longer completely ignoring the Tara Reade allegation, they're still doing a fairly poor job when it comes to talking about it. They're trying to defend Joe Biden and kind of tell her story, but not really, because they want Joe Biden to win, and they really don't want to hurt him when it comes to the 2020 election, because they hate Trump with a passion. And this article from the Washington Post is evidence of that. If you appreciated this content, be sure to subscribe, leave a like, a comment, and share it. I'd really appreciate that. If you have someone else who wants to watch it, feel free to share it with them. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.